right, welcome everybody to another edition of the Kentuckiana FileMaker Developers Group. This is the January edition, and this month we have Todd Weller, who is going to be presenting what he calls Execution Squad. We're going to be talking about the use of the FileMaker Data API from within FileMaker. And I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to Todd.
All right. Thank you, Ron. So we're going to start with some slides. Yeah, we're talking about doing more with the Execute FileMaker Data API script step. So here's some information about me. I think I know most of you that are on the meeting here, but just in case, so there's some information about while I'm working and, while I'm playing. Um, it's pretty much self-explanatory. Despite any similarities in appearance, though, I have never played a doctor on television. However, if you say, talk to me, Goose, I will stop and talk to you. Just a few disclaimers as we begin, just to let you know what to expect. The first half is pretty much a traditional presentation with slides and some snippets of code and responses that I've copied out just so I don't have to keep bouncing back and forth between slides and FileMaker as we look at some of the basics of setting up your Execute FileMaker Data API calls and things. And then the second half, there's still some slides, but we're going to spend some more time in FileMaker Pro. Just because we're a smaller group, if there's things we want to try, we could even take time out and do that as we get towards the end of the presentation. And then we have freedom to stop for questions, but I may defer if I answer it on a later slide. So just be aware of that. And also, I need to cover Pittsburghese for beginners. Um, this is where I'm from, is that part of the country. And you can see that there's an area of the country that is you guys. There's an area of the country that's y'all. There's a you all section. But then there's yuns in the southwestern corner of Pennsylvania. And when I say that by accident, I try not to when I'm giving presentations, but in case it slips out, I am referring to everybody in the room. So just wanted to make sure we're on the same page for that. So why should you want to do more? It's another tool in the toolbox. I think we're all very familiar with what Claris FileMaker does. It provides multiple ways to solve a problem. Sometimes, each method is equal. It solves the problem. That's all you need. But there are certainly, certain ways that are better than another depending on the situation. So this is just another tool in the toolbox. You want to know what it does so that you can apply it at the appropriate time. One of the reasons why I like it is because the result that it gives you is returned as a JSON object. Over the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, I've started to use JSON more and more internally to, capture chunks of information to pass off as script parameters or return them as results, whatever the case might be. And, this is so, more comfortable with it and you're getting it back. Because many of the processes, both internal and external, they need data in a JSON format. So this is going to give you something that you can start working with. The other thing that I like is the construction of the result is consistent. I think I know I've done it. We've probably all done it, where you're building a JSON payload, whether you're again passing it as a script parameter or using it as curl payload for an API call to something external. And you have to build that every time. And sometimes you may build it slightly differently. Well, if you're using the script step, it's going to give you that structure consistently to make your code a little bit easier to move from one solution to another. And because of that consistency, it's a lot easier to parse it out using existing tools, whether you have your own custom functions or even just the native functions that FileMaker gives us for doing that. And because it's easier to implement because it is just a single script step. Um, and the request is a JSON object. Again, we're used to using JSON, so, it makes it easier that way. And it is a single step. And, one of the examples that I've used where you go out and get, record data, using, get field names and then you get the item on each field name and build your own JSON. Well, I have an example of that in the data file. And if you throw out the white space and all the comments I put in there, it was like 40 lines in a script where I could do the same thing with a single script step with this. So certainly something to consider. All right, so with that, we'll get out of the slides for a moment and switch over here to FileMaker. And so here's one of the use cases that I've come up with for using Execute FileMaker Data API is to duplicate records. Now I know there is a duplicate record, menu item, script step, but sometimes just duplicating a record is not what you want it to do because there may be things that should be, either confirmed or uh, you should force the user to go back and fill that information in to validate it. And so this is one of those examples here where you see this is, an order that has been made and the customer calls back, we're going to reorder. But obviously, the shipping information is going to change. Maybe the quantities have changed. And so by using the Execute FileMaker Data API under the hood, I'm grabbing all the information about the order and the line items that you see, parsing it back out to create a new order, but then I'm able to control what information has not been filled in. So we'll go ahead and just duplicate the order. And again, we'll take a look at what's under the hood, but you can see here quantities are left blank. Shipping information here is ready to be, filled in again, and so we can continue with the order. Now, another way that I've used it, and I'm going to go ahead and open up a second window here, so you can see I've got, a whole bunch of items in this log table. And because of what the FileMaker data or the Execute FileMaker Data API allows you to do is that you can do some things outside of the context of whatever the script is running in. And so I've started using it as a way to actually create a log of the processes in the script. I know if you're running perform script on server, obviously you have the script error log, but it's only going to capture your errors. Where this is a way if you need to see what is going on in that, well, did it get to this step? Or did it get to that step? You're able to kind of create your own log with this method to kind of fill in the blanks, especially when you're troubleshooting. But there may be reasons why you would want to leave it enabled in your script the entire time. So what I've done here is we're going to look at that same order, but now we're just going to duplicate the order, but then I have, so you can see what happens over there with the script log. So when I, click the button, it's creating the records. You see that we now have, additional records that were created today, and it's telling me, it found the record, it copied this information, inserted those values, it duplicated the line items, and then the process was complete. So I know what was going on. So those are a couple of the examples. Like I said, bear with me, and we'll dig into those here in just a moment. All right. Okay, so this session is focused on the Execute FileMaker Data API script step, as you could tell from the name. It's an introduction to let you know what's possible. I certainly do not claim to be an expert. Um, it's also not a deep dive into the Claris FileMaker Data API, and that is the web service that resides on FileMaker server that allows you to open your FileMaker data to external sources. So we're not covering that part of it. This is specific to the script step. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the Claris FileMaker Data API. Like I said, it's not a deep dive, but we do need to talk about it, and you will see why in just a moment here, because, I mean, it's not Flight Club. So the Claris FileMaker Data API, the background of that, it was officially introduced in FileMaker 17. And again, it's designed for accessing hosted FileMaker databases through web services. And it follows the representational state transfer or REST architecture. So if people ask, does FileMaker offer a RESTful API? You can respond in the affirmative. And the components of that data API call are you have your endpoint URL, which is either IP address or the fully qualified domain name of your FileMaker server. the HTTP method that you're using. There's a number of different methods. The ones that are used with the FileMaker Data API are either post, get, patch, or delete. And then, of course, then you have your HTTP headers that are part of that API call. And there's a couple of the common ones that are, again, used specific with the FileMaker Data API call, which are your content type and your authorization. And then there's some additional and sometimes optional parameter data that is in JSON format. So that's the data API. And that's all we're going to talk about. And part of the reason why we talk about that is that the information there applies to what we can do with the Execute FileMaker Data API script step. So the script step was introduced with FileMaker 19. It uses that same underlying functionality as the FileMaker Data API on FileMaker hosts. And at the time it was introduced, the only supported actions were read and metadata. In its current incarnation, it was updated in Claris FileMaker 2024 or version 21, depending on which you prefer. And then with that, the supported actions now include create, update, delete, and duplicate, which are the reason why we can now do more with the Execute FileMaker Data API script step. So for similarities, it uses a layout or the underlying table occurrence to set the context of your action. And then the result is going to be returned in the same JSON format. So if you're already using the FileMaker Data API for things, you're used to parsing that JSON, the Execute FileMaker Data API script step is going to give you the same result. Now, where the differences come in is that the FileMaker file executing the script step does not need to be hosted. So whether you're running it locally on your copy of FileMaker Pro or even running it, in FileMaker Go, on your iPad or phone, it does not need to be hosted. And it does not make a web service call to a host using the FileMaker Data API. So they're, completely separate entities. And the FileMaker Data API does not need to be enabled on the host. So you can have a hosted file where you're using the Execute FileMaker Data API script step, but you do not need to enable the FileMaker Data API on your FileMaker server for that to happen. It's all going to work, internally, within the file, because again, it's not making those web service calls. It's all happening internally. And then one of the biggest differences is that the request is a simple JSON object. There is no endpoint URL, there's no method, and then there's no header. Everything is just in your JSON object that is the parameter that's fed into the script step that tells it what it's going to do. All right, so before opening script workspace, as we mentioned, the layouts are going to set the context for the action. The API request references the layout or the table since there is no endpoint URL. So that's one of the differences that you will see between a FileMaker Data API call versus the Execute FileMaker Data API script step is that there is a layout that's going to be called out in our JSON object because, again, there's no endpoint URL that would include that layout name. Certain metadata actions are going to be tied to a table occurrence, and then all the other actions are going to be tied to that layout or in that underlying table occurrence group. And then this is what allows for what I've dubbed contextless context. And what I mean by that is that the layout or the table of the request does not have to be from the current context of the script. So in the example we just looked at, we were in the orders and line items tables, but we were writing the log to a script log table that was, had no relationship at all. But I was able to create it there because it doesn't have to worry about the context of the script for the API call. But what happens there is that we're still tied to the the table occurrence grouping that is in that layout that we've referenced in our API call. So we still have the context that's in our relationship graph, but it does not have to be the context of our script. So I hope I've made that clearer than what it sounds to my in my head anyway. Uh, so let's go ahead and take a look at a layout here. So I'll switch back to FileMaker. Um, so here is, one of the layouts. As you can see here, like I said, for what information is returned via the FileMaker Data API, it's going to be whatever fields are on the layout. So you can see here we've got the four tables, and just because of my personality, I make sure that I know what this layout is, so that when future me finds it, it doesn't either remove a field or add a field or do something that's going to change the response that is returned. Now, what is nice? Let me get to another one here. Um, So here's the one that I'm using for the duplication script that we looked at in the example at the beginning, where you can see here's the bill to information, the ship to. And what's nice is that by adding a portal to that layout, I'm also able to return the portal data in a single API call. In the methods that I've used, previously, where I'm building my own JSON, is I've got to get the order and then switch over to the line items table, find all the items. Well, now because of the way the data API is structured, it returns that portal data. And all I need to do is just make sure that the portal is on the layout. And you also need to make sure that, believe it or not, that the allow vertical scrolling is on, I believe, so that it returns all of the line items and not just the first related record. So just need to that can be a potential gotcha there. So, all right. Okay. All right. So there are, with the Execute FileMaker Data API, there are three options. In the script step itself, you have the request, and that is, you know, a calculation that specifies the request, which is text formatted as a JSON object. There is the target, which is where the result is going to be put. That could be a field that's going to get the value inserted into, or you could use a variable. And if the variable doesn't exist, it gets created just like most of the other script steps that allow you to specify a variable as a target. And then there is a checkbox for selected entire comments. I don't know that I've ever had to really use that, but it is a possibility. Um, all right, so let's go ahead and move on. Here's some exalt results. Like I said, if you have the demo file, if you want to grab it, Ron has already shared a link to it in the chat for the meeting here. But you can get through and click through and see things. But what I've done is I've just grabbed uh, the request as well as the response. And so what we have here is just a sample of what a result would be, where you can see we have a messages object as well as the response object that we can then parse out. This, as you can see, is the example of a success. And so the request now, we're going to get into that, is there's a number of keys that you can use depending on what your action is. And there are some that are extraneous. These are ones that would apply if you're using the FileMaker Data API as a web service on FileMaker Server, but they don't apply to us using the script step. First one is databases. The script is always going to use the database associated with the window it's running in, so you don't have to worry about declaring that. The authorization is always going to be the script's privileges, which are either those of the current user or full access if you have your script set up to run with full access privileges. The content type does not need to be specified because the request is always must be in JSON format. And then there's also a script key that you can use that would have your data API call perform a script on FileMaker Server. Well, in this context, because we're running it as a script step, you would just use perform script to run another script if you needed to. All right, so for our request keys, you have your action again, which there's the six there: read, metadata, create, update, delete, and duplicate. There is a version, which is V1, V2, and V latest. Currently, there are just the two. And what those do is it the behavior changes when you have um, based on your layout. And what that is that with V1, if you switch to, oh, and I've just gone a complete blank, and I apologize for that. I knew I would forget something. It has to do with the way your layout is displayed. That if it's V1 and if you've saved it in table view versus form view, you're going to get a different response, where V2 is always going to return the data in the proper format, I believe. If anybody has any concerns about that, I will have to look that up and get back to you because, again, I apologize. I usually go with V latest just in case when I'm doing the versioning. Um, there is a layouts key, which again is the layout name. And there's also a tables key, which would be the table occurrence name. Now, what you'll notice about both of those is you'll see that the keys themselves are plural, but you're only going to specify a single either layout or table occurrence, and you're only going to refer to either one or the other. You would never have both of them in a request because if you're doing metadata, you may use the tables key, but if you're doing any of the other operations, it's always going to be a layout. So here's a few examples of the request. If we wanted to get the names of the table that are in our file, you can see we have our action, we have our tables, which we can leave blank, but the key itself has to appear as well as the version. And then when we get this response where you can see, and what we are looking at is just the response object. Since these are all successes, I took out the messages object just to save space and everything. But you can see here our message, the response rather, is giving us the tables array where each object is the table name and the base table of our tables. Um, Here's another example here where you can see we're just changing it up. We're going to use the layouts key this time. We're going to specify a specific layout. And when we use that request for our metadata, then we get this response where we're getting all the different metadata about each field that appears on that layout. You can see it's an array with the objects in it that includes things like how the auto ender is set, you know, the name, is it allowed to be empty? Um, the type, those kinds of things. It goes through all of the fields. And then as you can see, even though this particular layout did not have any portal on it, we would also get portal metadata as well. All right, so those are some of the metadata keys. Here's for you're doing a find operation or a query. The query is an array of JSON objects that specify the find criteria. There is a sort object, which is an array of JSON objects that specify the sort order of the records that are going to be returned. There is an offset, that's the record number of the first record in a range of records. There's also a limit, which is the maximum number of records that should be returned. The offset, as you might expect, is going to default to 1. The limit is going to default to 100. So now, if you do not change those values, you're going to get 100 records maximum, starting with the first record in what is returned. And so those are some things that you may have to adjust and make multiple calls to get all of the records if you're dealing with a data set that's that large and you don't want to increase, your limit. There is a layout.response key, which allows you to specify a layout name to retrieve the data in the context of a different layout. And this is one of the ones that was hardest for me to understand, and I haven't really figured out a use for it because if I need a response from a different layout, I just use that as my in my layouts key that I specified, as part of my request. I did do some testing to see if I specified, if I was trying to get a sum value, because we know that, that summary fields can sometimes, hurt your performance. I thought, well, if I find it on this layout, but I want the response from this layout, do I get it back, the result faster? And in my testing, I didn't really see that much of a difference. So if any of you have a better example of where this is helpful, I would certainly appreciate it. Um, the portal is going to specify the JSON object as the portal that you want the data from. If you do not specify this and you have a portal or multiple portals on your layout, you're going to get all portals. But if you only wanted to see a specific one, you would be able to declare that here. And then there's an offset and a limit for the portal as well, which is again the number of related records and where it's going to start in the return. The only minor difference here is that the offset still starts at 1, but the limit is 50 for your portal records. So just be aware of that. So here's a simple read request. You can see our action is now read. We're still looking at the products table. And then our query is a very simple array where we're looking for every uh, product that has jet in the description. And so here's a one that's an and request. Again, just showing you the query portion where you can see we have two name value pairs in our array, where again, description is jet, the price is less than 600. And then we can also do an or find as well, where this one here, you would just have multiple objects in your query array. And you can see a very simple example here where we've got description of jet or price is less than 400. All right, and then here is what the sort would look like if you had a sort that was part of your read request, where again, it's an array, and each object in the array specifies the field name, as well as the assort order, which are ascend, descend, or you can also specify a value list to use if you wanted to have it sort by a value list. And then here's a typical response that you would get from a read. So you can see there's an array where we've got our field data object, which are those 4 fields on that first layout that we looked at, because again, your response on a read is going to be tied to whatever fields are on that layout. So we're getting those 4 pieces of information, even though there are, I don't know, 20 fields in that particular table. But then we also get some metadata there at the bottom where you see we get the mod ID as well as FileMaker's internal record ID. And if there were a portal, you would see the portal data there. And then in the second column is just, another value that was returned as part of that response. And it also includes some data info, which is some more metadata where you can see there. It gives you the database name, the found count, the layout, the returned count, the table, and then the total record count. And those are values that you would monitor that if you see, the found count is, 500, but your return count was 100, then you would know, okay, now I need to adjust my limit and offset to go out and get the remaining records if that's something that your process needs. You're able to use the date range in your query. And what's nice is that it uses the same uh, uh, wildcard characters and operators that we're used to in our FileMaker finds. So this one here is looking for any contact that has a birth date in the second quarter of 1977. All right, so moving on, here are some more request keys that are specific to when we actually start modifying records. So you can see the record ID, which is the unique ID number of a record. And this is not the primary key that you've assigned to it. This is like the internal record ID that FileMaker has assigned. There is the field data, which is the JSON object that specifies the record data that's going to be either created or updated. There's a portal data object that's going to specify that related record data that's going to be created or updated. And then there's some optional request keys that you can use there as a mod ID. When you're doing an update action, if you provide a mod ID and it does not match the modification ID of the record to be updated, then it will not succeed. So it's a way to just check and make sure that the record hasn't been updated through some other method that you're not aware of. And then there are also options, an options object that has two potential objects nested inside of that. The one is entry mode, and that is a setting that's going to follow or ignore the validation option that is set in the allow user to override during data entry when they're writing data to that field, which you can see right here on the validation tab. If that checkbox is checked or not, this option here will allow you to change the behavior whenever your request is processed to where if it is set to script, it's going to ignore the field's data validation requirements. Or if it's set to user, it's going to follow whatever permissions the user has in their privilege set to either ignore or if they have to follow that validation. And similarly, there is a prohibit mode, again, where the values are either script or user, and that's the setting that's going to follow or ignore the auto enter option, prohibit modification of value during data entry when it's writing data, and that's the one that we find here on the auto enter tab. So again, if it's script, it's going to follow the typical script behavior. If it's set to user, it's going to follow whatever the user has in their privileges regarding the modification of the data. All right, so here's an example of a create product record request. You can see our action is create. There's our field data object with 4 fields in it. The layout and the version have kind of carried over, the same. When we run that, this is the type of response that we would get, again, ignoring the message portion of the object for the time being. And that is where we get the mod ID as well as the record ID. So, obviously the mod ID, you expected it to be 0 because we just created it. And now we have that internal record ID that FileMaker has given that particular record. If we wanted to update the product, again, the action is update. The field data, you can see there is just, a JSON object. Now you'll notice that the data that I'm updating is not the same data that I used when I created it. So you don't have to create an update with the same information. You can update it with more fields, fewer fields, different fields. So you have a lot of options there. But you also notice that in this case, because we are doing an update, the record ID is now a required value because that's how it identifies which record is actually going to be updated with that information. So that's where if you're using the Execute FileMaker Data API in this fashion, you need to make sure you're keeping track of that internal record ID. And so the response that comes back is just the mod ID is 1 in this case because we've updated a record that was just created. And you'll notice it does not return the record ID because we already specified it in our request as to which one was going to be updated. If you're doing a duplicate, here you have, the action is duplicate. Don't have to worry about any field data or portal data because you are duplicating the record. You just need to worry about your record ID again. And in this case here, I'm just showing, that options object with the entry mode and prohibit mode set to follow script behavior for whenever the record is deleted or duplicated. And then here's, a typical response, which is very similar, or actually almost identical to what the response would be for a create, where we get the mod ID and the record ID back. And then finally, the last one here is a delete, where we've got our action, again, specifying it by record ID and which layout to use, which is going to set the context. And then our response is empty brackets. So that way we know that if there's no information coming back, well, obviously that particular record was deleted. Okay, so those are the successes and kind of some basic structure of our requests. Let's go ahead and look at some of the unsuccessful responses that I encountered. Um, and here is an example of a full response uh, with a failure. You'll notice we have our messages object, our response object. The response is empty because it failed, but then within that messages array, you'll see there's an object that tells us the code number as well as the message. In this case, it was, no records were found when I made a read request. What's nice is you'll notice that 401 is the same FileMaker error code that we get when we're using find mode in FileMaker Pro. Um, so it's very helpful that way. The other thing you want to notice is that messages is an array. I've only ever seen one object in said array, but just be aware that is an array with that object in it because that will determine how you actually pull that information out if you need to parse it. So for handling errors, a couple different ways that you can do it. You want to extract the error details from the messages object. Uh, as I noted, it's an array, and then each object in the array includes the code and the message. And you can use the JSON get element to extract the details. So your code would look something like that, where you're getting from array 0, the code key, and then the message. Um, because I was doing this all the time, I ended up using a custom function for each key, so you don't have to keep, repeating that all the time. Sorry, I hit the wrong up. I apologize for my dogs barking in the background. So, all right. Now what's very nice is that the script step follows the expected script step behavior when we're using the Execute FileMaker Data API script step. So if you use get last error, it's going to return the same value that you find in the code key. And if you use get last error detail, it's going to return the same value that is in the message key. And then get last error location, which is a fairly new function, is going to return the script name, the step name, and the line number of the error. Um, Now, unfortunately, because once you set a variable to get last error, all of a sudden now that's succeeded, so you've lost what the actual error was. So you want to be able to capture all three values at once. So that's where you use a set variable script step and then the let statement so that you can declare those variables all three at the same time in a single set variable step. So it looks something like this, where we're getting the message, the location, as well as the error number. So here's some of the common errors, and what I've done here is you can see there's the request on the left, the result is on the right, just so you can see what I did wrong. So this here is we've got an action where we're finding, and we've got the layout in our query, and it says that was an unknown action. And that is where, you know, seemed like an obvious one because it's actually read, where we're used to doing finds. So it's going to tell you that. Here's one with an undefined layout. You'll notice that the layout key is missing in our request. And when it comes out, it says, well, the layout name is required. Now, what you'll notice, and hopefully, is that the code between the previous error and this error is both 1708, which are specific to the FileMaker Data API. But what's nice is the message actually gives us details. So we're not left, wondering, okay, what does this 1708 error mean? So that's another argument for when you are doing your error capture and trapping, is to try to grab both the code and the message, because depending on what it is, that message is going to be important. Here's a missing layout where, again, the layout's key is there. I've just, made the layout name plural, and it comes up with the layout is missing. And we're back now to a 105, which is a standard, FileMaker error. Here's the missing field. Again, I just made the field name a plural, and we get the 102 field is missing. We've already looked at the no the 401 error. This one here, took me a second to figure out why I was getting that error. And I think it was in a conversation I had at the Full Access conference with one of the attendees, is that we've got a request there with our sort, and I just threw in the sort order of go up. Just so that it wasn't ascend or descend. But the message that I got back was that the value list is missing, which I thought, well, that's kind of strange, but I guess ascend and go up is not part of the value list that ascend and descend are in. But what it actually is that there is no go up value list in my solution. So if I had a value list that was, quarters or month names or something, I could actually specify that in my sort order and it would sort by that value list. And it's just assuming that because it doesn't match ascend or descend, I'm trying to specify a value list. Here's an invalid field, uh, where again it gives us the field missing. I think this one here, I think the list price is actually one that doesn't exist. Here's one where I just set the record ID to a very large number and get the expected 101 record is missing error code. Here's one with the invalid modification ID. And so again, I just picked a mod ID that I knew, and you can see that there is actually a specific code and message that comes back if the record modification ID does not match what the current record is, and it's not going to update that record for you. And then this one here, as I was duplicating an item, and I had my entry mode and prohibit mode set to follow script behavior. I picked a record, and I got a user canceled action, uh, which I could not, because like I did not cancel that action. I don't know what's going on there. But what I realized is that I was using UUIDs as my primary keys, and I had set the auto enter options to not replace. And so what was happening is it was trying to duplicate a record and it couldn't change the UUID, which had to be unique. So it was treating it as a user canceled action. So that's just be aware of that and don't get stumped on it like I did until I figured out what was actually going on. Okay, so I think we're ready to switch back over to FileMaker, but I saw a couple of things pop up in the chat that I did not stop to look at. So I don't know if that was a side conversation, we can take a moment here for questions.
It was just John Howell saying that he had to duck out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Duplicating a portal record from the same layout. I get invoice and line items. I want to duplicate the invoice and all the line items all without changing layouts. Supposedly there's a way to do it, but I'm having a hell of a time passing the object name of the portal into the request structure for the data API.
Yeah, it's a little different, and I actually have an example of that later on, not necessarily with line items, but with my like script logging solution.
That's fine.
That if you want to hang on to your question, we can dig into that here in just a bit, if that's all right,
Yeah, that'd be great.
and see if that helps. Um, so let's see, we'll go back to.
And I didn't think you had to deal with when I've been duplicating records with the data FileMaker Execute Data API. It takes care of the primary key by itself. I haven't had any issues with it makes a new primary key, which I have to gather. So,
You are correct. Yeah, and like I said, this was a self-inflicted thing.
okay.
In fact, here, I'll just dive in right now. Like I said, like the orders table, or I think it was the items table, is like the items that are on the order. And I just had, your typical, um, hang on, products. Is that when I set up my product key, like I just have, like this one here, as I'm generating, a serial number. It
Right.
works fine. Where I ran into problems is in this table is that, I call it, I had a case of the clevers, is where I decided that I was going to go ahead and use the get UUID, because that way I didn't have to care, no data collisions or anything like that. But where I messed up is that I had left this box checked so that
Yeah.
whenever it duplicated, it was not able to replace the existing value with the new value for that new record, where if you uncheck this, then it's no longer a problem.
Okay. Let me
But
do
it's one of
that.
those things that, in my mind, it's like, well, I don't want the UUIDs to ever change. I don't want somebody to accidentally change it. So it's made sense for me to, check that box where if you leave it unchecked, then you're right. The UUIDs get handled just fine. Because I think, as long as you're prohibiting modification during data entry, then, the script and, and the API process is still going to be able to handle that. So,
Okay, got it. I just checked mine and I have that box unchecked as well, so that
okay.
validated it.
Yeah. Like I said, that one had me stumped. I'm like, why does that was such a weird error to get to? And then finally the light bulb came on. So, all right. So I don't want to run out of time. So I don't have slides for this. So I'm just going to go ahead and point this out. Let me go browse mode. This is in the demo file.
Just
And
so
I
you
have
know,
some,
Todd, just so you know, you have plenty of time. We actually have a 2 hour scheduled meeting, so
oh,
you can use as much of that as you like. So don't feel
okay. Well, I mean, if you guys don't mind, I'll keep talking, but I don't want to bore anybody either. So,
okay.
yeah, so here's just like I said, I'll just quickly hit the demo file. Is that I've got like successful actions on this layout, all of the common errors that we went through. If you want to recreate the common error and see all that, you can do that. And then here's some more other complex finds and other requests that I was just kind of playing around with. And what it does is that this is the calculation you can see that I'm using to create the request. The request will be down here. And then if you switch over tabs, then you get to see the result. So I just thought that was easier than trying to flip back and forth to the data viewer and all those kinds of things. But like I said, I think we've looked at like I said, I think this was one of the last uh, finds where you've got the two different requests because it's an OR search. So you end up with this. Yeah, that was the one. And here we're looking at sorting by weight. And so then we switch over here. Again, there's our messages object. And then we get into our response where we've got the field data, mod ID, record ID. And in this case, it returned, I believe it's oh, quite a few. Turned more than I expected. And then you get your data info down here where it says, hey, I found 32. I gave you all 32. But there's a total of 97 products. Um, here's a find using, the asterisk operator that's going to work just like you would use in FileMaker. Um, and this is pulling data from that script log from our example there at the beginning, where I've got, the query is just, the session UID, going to sort it. Um, and so this is where it's got the field because it was this particular session, but then here's where it brings in all of my portal data. And you'll see here is, and what's one thing you need to keep aware or be aware of is that in your field data, you just have to worry about the name of the field. But when you get into your portal data, you'll notice that the portal data actually includes the full table name, double colon, field name for each field or piece of information that it returns from those related records in your portal. Now, one of the ways that I use that, because this allowed me to just experiment with the go to list of records um, script step that I believe was from FileMaker 25, is that I'm using. Let me get back to that layout. Just So I've got, pretty much the same request, but then I'm taking the information that is in this response, grabbing each of the record IDs, and then I'm able to go over here. And this is just, one of my, oops, that's a session. Here's the log. And it's pulling up those 20 records that were part of that it found. Um, all right. And so here's a couple examples. And part of this came out of an application where just the way that the information was related, there wasn't a clear path to use, like go to related record and taking multiple hops through the relationship graph. That just seemed to, I didn't feel like it was going to give me the result that I wanted. And so that's where I just used the data API and put several things together. So I'm just going to go ahead and we'll pick birdseed here. And so again, I'm just pausing it here in a window rather than diving out to the data viewer. But here's our request where we're just looking for that particular product in our items. So as I step through, here's the response from that request. And I'm just worried about the order ID because I want to find out each order that particular item appears on. So I get the order ID back. And there's a few of them. So the next thing I do is I'm using this while calculation to convert my response that I got, where I'm just taking, the response, looping through it, and then converting the order ID foreign key, that's my naming convention, over to an order ID array. And so when I do that, now my response is just this, where you see I've got an array of the 8 objects with the order ID. And then what that allows me to do is I can feed that into a second data API request where now I'm going to go find those orders where that birdseed appears on. And now I get this response where it's showing me all of the different orders where I want maybe specific shipping information that you can see there. And then I'm going to run another while calculation that does essentially the same thing. It just pulls that in, builds a new array with the shipping information. And so now I've got a final array of just the ship twos for each of those orders that I can now send on to another, API web service, whatever I want to do with that information. And then this example does the same thing, which I don't have to go into the details there. But like, the beginning is the same. I process it, run the result. But now what I'm doing is I'm actually taking the IDs that I've returned and actually doing a standard find operation of those objects and then just going to it if, hey, we need to call everybody that ordered birdseed and let them know that there was a recall, or hey, we're going to give you a refund, or you can reorder, whatever, just to help with that. So those are a couple more of the use cases. Now, one of the things, and I'm going to just jump back into the slides here for a moment. So you look at that. Is that we do need to talk about performance. And that is, unfortunately, Execute FileMaker Data API is not the Swiss Army knife that's going to solve all of your problems. Because for each create request, you're only allowed to create one record at a time. Like you can't feed it multiple, and say, okay, create these 10 records or whatever the case might be. And where your performance suffers is because, in the background, FileMaker is creating an, I guess, I don't know if instance is the, or a session might be a better word, but it's creating an API session to give the script step everything that it needs to be able to execute your request. Then it does the action and then it gets rid of all of that information. So every time you're doing a create, it's got to stand up an API session, execute the request, and then stand it down. So that constant back and forth is going to add up when you're because of that overhead. Um, and apparently I had more notes on my slide that I didn't go far enough. So that got me thinking about how do we create multiple records in a single session, and that was to use a portal. Because what you can do is in a portal, you can create multiple related records in a single request. You add the related table to the relationship graph. You ensure that the allow creation of new records, in the relationship
That's a
option is
critical piece
enabled.
right there.
Pardon?
That's a critical piece right there. If you miss that, you're screwed.
Yeah,
As I
exactly.
learned.
Exactly. And then the other thing is you want to add the portal and related fields to the layout. Now, what's interesting, at least in my use, is that the main table, it didn't matter whether I had the fields on the layout or not. But if I didn't have the fields that I wanted to insert information in the portal, the step would fail. So you do need to be aware of that, make sure your portal has the right fields in it for what you want to create. So like the example that we looked at before, uh, at the beginning where I was creating that script log, this is a slimmed down version. It's not quite all of the information, but I just had my field data was the date, the time, some type of message, and I said, okay, go to the script log and create this record. Well, what I did, and we'll take a look at an example, is that I said, okay, well, I'm going to create a session, and the field data is, okay, the file name that it's running in. But then I've got all of this related data in the portal that's actually going to be my log. So now I can run through the entire script and essentially do a batch create of my log data at the end. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Oops. Is it? I'm going to click this button. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Okay. Let's do. How did I do this? I apologize, everyone. I got to get into the script workspace here. So we'll just do it this way. Okay. I just clicked the wrong. Okay. So if I click the button here, and it's going to duplicate this record, and you can see it took, 2,600 milliseconds for it to execute. Now, if I run the version to create the session, it was 300 milliseconds. So obviously, and I was only creating, about, in this case, 28, records in my script log. um, went from 2,600 seconds to 300. So definitely worth trying to figure out how to do that in the uh, uh, sorry, just drew a blank. As your portal data. Excuse me. So um, so so just a few final thoughts, and then we can just kind of open it up and get under the hood and try things and answer questions. Um, just a couple of my personal preferences. As you saw, I like, building API specific layouts that prevent, accidental changes which could impact the result. If you're using a data entry layout and add a field to that, then all of a sudden you're going to get a different response via the API. Um, I always use API or some other prefix in the layout name so I know exactly what it's for. I also try to avoid any special characters, even spaces, because as we noted, this is built on the FileMaker Data API web service on FileMaker Server. So any layouts that you build for your Execute FileMaker Data API script step, you do have the option to then turn around and use it as part of the FileMaker Data API if that becomes, needed. When you're using the script step, I like using variables for both the request and the target. I just feel more comfortable, building it that way, and that way the response comes back into a variable, and then I can decide how I'm going to handle it, rather than writing it directly into a field or something. And then you also want to consider insulating your requests, from layout or field name changes, because again, you're setting JSON in text. And so if it's hard coded and a field name changes, then all of a sudden you're going to break um, uh, your request or whatever that request happens to be. My personal preference is I like using the name ID function that Fabrice Nordman developed. Uh, he's with One More Thing, but I know there are other tools out there that would do the same thing. That just happens to be the one that I like. And what that allows you to do is you provide the ID number, and then it's going to return the name of the object, whether it's the table or the field or table occurrence or whatever the case might be. Now, here's some of the resources that I've used, primarily the FileMaker Data API guide, as well as the FileMaker Pro help. Obviously, the FileMaker Data API guide is for the web service on FileMaker Server, but a lot of the information does translate because it's built on that. Just be aware of the things that don't apply because you are running the script step, and then obviously the script step itself has its own help page. Um, there's the session I did on Community Live way back. And then there's also a number of partner resources, which I'm not going to try to list here because I don't want to leave anybody out. And then if you're interested, you can find that name ID function at Brian Dunning's website. And that brings us to the Q&A. So I'll just minimize this for now. I know it was at Kirk, you had the question about, the portal data.
Yeah, I want to be able to duplicate from a single layout the record and the portal records as well.
Yeah, and like I said, the biggest thing that I found was that when you're specifying your array of objects for the portal, you need to make sure that it's not just field name. It has to be table occurrence name as well as field. And so that I actually created a custom function, and I'm going to go ahead and get into the script. Like I said, hopefully this
I'm
will be
having
helpful.
trouble finding how to take it. I keep getting when I try to use the TO name as the structure, I end up with an offset error, and I can't figure out how to use the offset.portal-name function to pass the portal name as a named object into the request string.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so here's the example that I'm using for the request. And what I ended up doing is like, here's, the general request, setting that calculation there. But when I started doing the log data is I actually created a custom function. And so like here's like the 6 pieces of data that I'm going to pass into the script log function. And what that does is that it builds the object that I need to put into the array. And what that looks like is here. As again, we've got, the level, the message, the error number, all of that stuff that I need. And, this here is where I went a little crazy, um, using the name ID function where I'm getting the table. I've specified the ID number of my table occurrence, which I know it should be this. So I just put that note there just so I would have it. That gives me the table name. And then my keys, I'm doing the same thing with that table name using the double colon and the name ID, for the IDs of the individual fields. And then I'm building that JSON object. So if we step through the script, let me get to the right context here. And then we'll just go ahead and run through this with debugger. All right. So again, like the session data is just that. And yeah, let's see, it's not, it's script log data. So that function then allows me to build it like so that I don't have to worry about all of this stuff. I can just feed the information that I want, and then it spits this back for me so I don't have to duplicate it every single script step where I'm adding it.
Mhm.
And so then as we, step down through, well, we don't need to step through this whole thing. So I'm just going to let it run through the whole way pretty much to the end. So I've got, one last piece that I add on to say that, the window's closed and everything is done. And I didn't save this, so I got to redo it.
By the way, the latest version of Monkey Bread software has that JSON format built into the data viewer,
Oh,
which is very nice.
I'll have to look into that. Yeah, so like I said, where I'm just, getting this array created, as you can see, and then making a final update to my session to give it an end time. And then here in the parameter is that I'm actually passing to the script that then, takes it and processes it. Is where I've got the session object, my log array. That's not what I wanted to do. Sorry, I'll get it right here. Is that when I build the request, is that then I can just add, because everything that came in from the parent script was this information down. All I had to do was insert, the name of the TO here, or name of the TO there as my portal data, and then just have my field data up here for the record that I'm actually, creating in my session table, and then here's all my log data. So like I said, that's how I solved the problem, was just to go through and use the custom function so that everything was a little bit more consistent, and I wasn't having to do that every single script step where I wanted to capture that information that I was sending to my log. So I don't know if that, hopefully that helps you.
Yeah, I mean, the issue I'm having is my understanding from talking to Matt Petrosky and when I'm reading and stuff, that if all you need is basically the record ID, the portal object name, and a create the relationship turned on, and you can duplicate the portal records just by duplicating using the record ID and that name. I'm having trouble getting the portal object name passed into the request structure to make the duplicate happen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I apologize. I don't think I've ever, run into that, but like I said, the examples that I have are the two primary use cases that I've used this in. So I've not, run into that need. So I'm afraid I can't shed any
It's
more
a
light
pretty
on
simple
it.
request. There's basically only three elements to it. Is can't get I can get the record ID, but just can't seem to get the table occurrence or the portal object name to take and parse out correctly into the request string for the data API.
Okay. I'll have to think about that. It looks like Dennis has a question, and we can move on to that. And if there's time, maybe we could just pull up and do some experimenting, see what we
Real
can
quick,
figure out.
so
If
Kirk,
that
you're
works.
talking about duplicating a portal record, just the portal
Yes.
record.
Yeah. So I run the code to duplicate FileMaker Data API, duplicate the primary or the parent record,
Yeah.
grab the new primary key that's generated, then go to the FileMaker Data API again, the Execute FileMaker Data API again to duplicate the portal records, and going to loop through the record IDs and do those. And it just breaks on trying to identify the name of the portal to get there, because all he really needs is the record ID and the object is going to with the create the relationship, and then reset the foreign key to the primary key from the newly created duplicate record. It's done. I mean, it's giving me a damn error and I can't find it. Can't figure it out.
I was just thinking, I mean, if it were me, I probably wouldn't be trying to duplicate through the portal, but I'd be grabbing the record IDs and then going to a layout for that table and duplicating the record there.
Oh yeah, and you can do that if you switch layouts, but I'm just saying that it can be done with a single layout according to Matt. So I'm trying, maybe it's more of an academic exercise than anything. I was just trying to say, Matt, you said it could be done. I need to figure out how to do this.
Yeah, I've never had need to duplicate a portal record with the data API either, or not trying to do it through the portal itself. So
Yeah.
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 I'd
I've
be
only done
interested
the
to see if you
create through
ever,
the portal.
yeah, I'd be interested to see if you find a solution to that.
Okay.
Keep us
I'll get
posted.
Yeah, you've had your hand up for quite a while there, Dennis.
Okay. I'll try to keep this quick because I also have to be out of here in 10 minutes. It's a use case question for you, Todd. And sort of like, what would Jesus do? In this case, it's what would Todd do? I'm sure you've all had the same kind of situation occur to you where you've got an appointment for something like a haircut or a doctor's appointment. You get a text message that allows you to either type the number 1 or a letter Y to confirm it, or something else to cancel. I'm working with a client now that requires me to send that kind of a text message to their clients. And if they ever sign the contract, Ron will be working with them too. So there's a service that I discovered recently, and I presented it to a different user group recently, and maybe I'll be presenting it here sometime soon. It's a service called ClickSend that offers really wonderful integration with FileMaker. So I'm able to send the messages out, and in the account configuration in ClickSend, I can decide what I want to have happen with replies to those SMS messages. One kind of a reply would be that you have to get individual emails, but the better one is what they call a webhook. So my listening to your presentation, Todd, I was constantly thinking about how would I handle the webhook? Would I do it with the Execute FileMaker Data API script step, or would I just do it with the FileMaker Data API itself? The webhook, of course, is a URL, and the URL would go to the host name of the database, and it would specify in that URL, one of the parameters would be a script that would run so that it would intercept the normal on first open script. And another parameter might be a variable. I know you can't have parameters specifically in the on first open script. So if I were to compose a webhook URL that would perform the necessary action on a particular record in the database, would you do it with the script step in that script that runs, that gets intercepted by the on first open script? Or would you just do it with the data API directly?
Oh,
Did I make it that clear?
think so. Because the initiation of the request is coming from the third party
Right.
because of how because the script step is a script step. I almost think it would be better coming in via the data API,
Okay.
that your response is going to be potentially faster.
The
Like I
the
said,
webhook would contain the UUID of that particular order record that has to get adjusted, and then it's adjusted either to confirm or cancel whatever action the user has chosen. But
yeah,
you would just do it with the data API, which is already turned on in the database.
right. Yeah, I think that's probably because the execute FileMaker Data API script step, it is a script step. So you would still have to get that information into the system and have it execute that script.
Right.
So I think if you're already going through all of that trouble, it's probably better to use either the data
Okay, thank
API
you.
or even the OData.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to have to run quickly, so let me just thank you for whatever I did learn today.
Okay.
And just as a freebie for you, there's no E in the word hindrance.
Oh, there isn't? Okay. Well, thank you.
I can't help it. I'm like an electromagnet for typos.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Dennis.
All right. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Todd.
Yep, you're welcome.
Well, I'd say that about wraps it up.
Yeah.
Down to me, you, and Alex now. So I appreciate it, Todd. I actually I got farther along this time around. I actually had a little demo utility in one of my databases that I was able to start fetching records and pulling in the JSON response and all that. So
Okay.
the demo file is going to be really helpful. I've got a use case coming up that I want to try and use it for. I want to be able to grab a list of invoices and line items and then do some JavaScript in a web viewer to kind of have a collapsible
Okay.
list view of those and being able to pull those records as JSON would be the best way to go, I think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, like I said, it's not the perfect tool, but it's worth considering in certain
yeah,
instances for sure. So
yeah, I think there'll definitely be the occasional use case where I could see wanting to be able to do that. So all
okay,
right.
well, I hope everybody enjoyed it. So
Yeah, sure
Yeah,
they
good
did.
job, man.
well, thanks,
All right.
Alex.
Yeah, sorry, some of this is over my head, so I'm just watching.
Okay.
But we'll go ahead and post this to YouTube shortly and send out a notice when it gets posted, so you'll see it.
All right.
When it gets posted. But
Sounds good.
all right. Well, thanks, Todd.
All right,
All
thank
right.
you,
Thank
Todd.
you, Ron.
See ya.
Appreciate the invite to
Yeah.
come and join you guys today. So I'll have to
Yeah,
try
good
to add this
job.
to my regular.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming and like I said, it's a little bit of a struggle these days trying to keep attendance up at the groups, and it's something.
Yes, I know our Pittsburgh group we've got 2 or 3 or 4 because we still do hybrid. So there's a few of
Yeah,
us that meet in person, but the numbers in person are dwindling, and
yeah,
sometimes we'll get 10 total between what's in the room and who joins us online. But yeah,
yeah.
it's
Mhm.
Yep, it's an ongoing kind of conversation about what can we do to revitalize interest in the groups and keep people interested. And I totally get it too, because there's several groups throughout the month, and I'll sign up for them with every intention of going, and then get busy or just completely forget.
exactly,
And
yeah.
so, it's I think one of the things that's been talked about too is a centralized location for listing groups and being able to have all the information about all the groups in one place, so that if you want
Yeah.
to see what's going on, you just click on go to one website or go to one link and get a full schedule of all the different groups and stuff. So
Yeah.
I'd like to build that one of these days, but we shall see.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's something because I know like Claris has the listing where you can have your event listed,
Yeah.
but it's almost like the user group we should only have to tell you when we're not meeting so
Yeah.
that people can always see, you know,
Yeah, it's
through the
it's not
year.
right, and
'Cause-
it's not real prominent, and it's not something that people know to even go look for or anything.
Yeah.
And even when you've been there and then you're like, oh man, where was that link? Or where did I see that list? And then trying to find it again is it's not real useful in my opinion.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe one day we'll come up with something better.
Yeah.
But
All right. Well, again, thank you.
all
You guys
right.
have a great afternoon and stay warm out there. So,
Yeah. Thanks
and
for
good
Yeah.
luck. Like I said, good luck dealing with the ice because luckily
yeah.
we got a
Yeah.
lot of snow, but none of that ice stuff. So,
All right. We will see you next time.
all right. Sounds good. Thanks again.